The city skyline blurred as Nathan Cole gripped the steering wheel of his midnight blue Range Rover, his mind clouded with a mix of exhaustion and frustration. Tonight was supposed to be about drowning his problems. His recent divorce had cost him half his fortune, and the bitterness sat heavy in his chest. He had spent the evening at a high-end bar in downtown Lagos, hoping that whiskey could wash away the sting of betrayal. But no amount of alcohol could erase the reality of what he had lost. As he turned onto the deserted road leading to his gated mansion, his thoughts were interrupted by a sudden figure darting into the street. "What the hell?" Nathan slammed his foot on the brakes, tires screeching against the asphalt as his car jerked to a halt. His heart pounded as he stared through the windshield, adrenaline sobering him up in an instant. A young woman stood frozen in the glare of his headlights, her breath ragged, eyes wide with terror. She looked disheveled, her once elegant gown now tattered and covered in dust, her long dark hair falling in tangled waves around her face. Before Nathan could even register what was happening, a black SUV sped past, its engine roaring as it vanished down the street. The woman's head snapped toward it, her entire body trembling. She turned back to Nathan, desperation in her eyes. "Please, help me. Forced marriage," she whispered, barely able to stand. Nathan cursed under his breath. This was exactly the kind of situation he wanted to avoid. A stranger, a woman in distress, trouble. But before he could even think of brushing her off, the woman's knees buckled. She collapsed right in front of his car. "Shit," Nathan muttered. He stepped out, his expensive loafers crunching against the pavement as he approached her. Up close, she looked even worse. Bruises on her arms, dirt smeared on her face, and sheer exhaustion in her eyes. This wasn't just some drunken mess. This woman was running from something, or someone. Nathan glanced at the empty road. He exhaled sharply. "Get in the car." The woman blinked up at him, shocked. "What?" "You heard me. Get in before I change my mind," Nathan said impatiently, looking over his shoulder. Without hesitation, she struggled to her feet, gripping the edge of the car door for support. The moment she was inside, Nathan slid behind the wheel and sped toward his mansion, his jaw tight. What the hell had he just gotten himself into? Nathan pulled into his private driveway, the security lights casting a golden glow on his modern mansion. As he killed the engine, the woman in the passenger seat let out a shaky breath, looking around nervously. Nathan sighed, running a hand through his messy dark hair. "Before you say anything, who the hell are you, and why were those guys after you?" The woman hesitated. "My name is Isabelle Okafor." Her voice was soft, but carried a weight of urgency. "And I was supposed to be married today." Nathan scoffed. "So you ditched your wedding and ended up running into my car? That's some movie-level drama." Isabelle flinched. "I didn't run away because of cold feet," she murmured. "I was being forced." Nathan frowned, crossing his arms. "Forced?" She swallowed, her fingers tightening around the hem of her dress. "My father, he made a deal. He promised me to Chief Ibuka, a man twice my age. In exchange, my father gets a political position in the next election." She let out a bitter laugh. "I was never a daughter to him, just a bargaining chip." Nathan leaned back, processing her words. A forced marriage for power and status. He could almost feel the bitter taste of irony. He had just lost half of everything he worked for in a failed marriage, and here she was, fighting to escape a marriage before it even started. Still, this was not his problem. "You could have gone anywhere," he muttered. "Why the hell did you run in front of my car?" "I didn't plan this," Isabelle said quickly. "I was hiding in an abandoned shop near the highway. Then those men, Chief Ibuka's guards, found me. I panicked. I ran. I didn't even know where I was going." Nathan exhaled heavily, rubbing his temple. "Great. So now I have a runaway bride hiding in my house, and a powerful, corrupt politician looking for her. Isabelle's lips quivered. I know you have no reason to help me, but I swear to God if they take me back, my life is over. Please, just let me stay the night. Just until I figure out what to do. Nathan closed his eyes for a moment, contemplating. This was exactly the kind of mess he didn't need. But looking at her, a terrified woman who had risked everything to escape, he knew he couldn't just throw her out. Fine, he muttered, standing up. You can stay. Isabelle let out a breath of relief. Thank you. But, he added firmly, this doesn't mean I'm your knight in shining armor. You stay here, you don't cause problems, and if anyone comes looking for you, you're on your own. She nodded quickly. Understood. Nathan turned to leave, but hesitated at the doorway. Something told him his life had just taken a sharp, unexpected turn, and he wasn't sure he liked it. The living room was quiet as Isabelle clutched the warm cup of tea Nathan had given her. The mansion felt surreal, modern, cold, and far too luxurious for someone like her. Nathan sat across from her, watching her with sharp eyes. You still haven't told me what your plan is, she hesitated. I don't have one. Nathan sighed. That's not exactly comforting. Isabelle bit her lip. She had one idea, but it was crazy, reckless, desperate, and Nathan was the only one who could help her. Taking a deep breath, she set the cup down and looked him in the eye. I need you to take my virginity. Nathan choked on his whiskey, coughing violently. You need me to what? If I'm not a virgin, Chief Ibuka won't want me, she whispered. It's the only way I can be free. Nathan rubbed his face, laughing bitterly. You've got to be kidding me. You want me, a complete stranger, to sleep with you just to make your creepy fiancé lose interest? Isabelle swallowed hard. Yes. Nathan's expression darkened. I think you're underestimating how twisted these men are. Even if you weren't pure, they could still force you into it. Tears welled in Isabelle's eyes. I don't know what else to do. Nathan studied her, then shook his head. I don't take advantage of desperate women. She looked away, her shoulders slumping. But, Nathan said after a pause, you can stay here until we figure something else out. Isabelle blinked. You'd do that? Nathan exhaled. Looks like I don't have much of a choice, do I? His lips curled into a smirk. But let's be clear, this is temporary. A flicker of hope flashed in Isabelle's eyes. Maybe, just maybe, she had found an escape after all. Nathan exhaled, rubbing his aching temples. The night had been long, and he could feel a headache creeping in. He needed sleep, not drama. Isabelle sat on the couch, curled up like a child, her body still trembling slightly. Come on, Nathan muttered, standing up. You can take the guest room. She blinked, startled. You're letting me stay? He rolled his eyes. Would you rather sleep outside? She quickly shook her head. Nathan led her down the hallway, stopping in front of a large door. Here. He pushed it open, revealing a spacious but simple bedroom. Isabelle stepped in cautiously, her eyes scanning the soft white bed, the warm bedside lamp, and the large window overlooking the dark city. This is too much, she murmured. Just take it, Nathan muttered, already tired of the conversation. He turned toward his room but paused. Here. He grabbed a big t-shirt from the nearby closet and tossed it to her. You should change into something comfortable. Isabelle caught it, her fingers gripping the soft fabric. Thank you. Nathan didn't respond. He just walked away and shut his door. Nathan leaned against the kitchen counter, pinching the bridge of his nose. The headache was getting worse. He poured himself a glass of water, then paused. His gaze flickered toward the guest room door. Has she eaten? With a low sigh, he grabbed some bread, eggs, and tomatoes. It wasn't a 5-star meal, but it was something. 15 minutes later, he knocked on her door. Isabelle. The door creaked open, and she peeked out. She had changed into his oversized t-shirt, and the sight of it made something shift in his chest. It hung loosely on her small frame, reaching her mid-thigh. He cleared his throat and handed her the plate. "You look like you need food," he said simply. She stared at the meal, her eyes misty. "No one has cooked for me before." Nathan raised a brow. "Really? My father doesn't care," she whispered. "And my mother—" She trailed off. Nathan didn't push. "Eat and get some rest." She took the plate and whispered, "Thank you." He didn't respond. He just walked away. Nathan lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind clouded with exhaustion. The room was quiet, save for the faint ticking of the wall clock. Just as his body began to relax, a soft creak of the door caught his attention. He turned his head, his heart slowing, then speeding up. Isabelle stood at the doorway, her small frame barely visible in the dim glow of the bedside lamp. She hesitated, gripping the fabric of his oversized t-shirt, the one he had given her. Nathan exhaled, rubbing his face. "Isabelle, what are you doing?" She didn't move, didn't speak for a moment. Then, in a voice so small it barely reached him, she whispered, "I can't sleep." He sat up slightly, watching her. The fear in her eyes was still there, deep, haunting. "Do you need something?" he asked, though he already knew what. Isabelle swallowed hard. She glanced away, embarrassed. "I know this is stupid, but I don't want to be alone." Nathan sighed, running a hand through his hair. This was a bad idea. But when he looked at her again, standing there, lost, trembling, he couldn't say no. He lifted the blanket slightly, an unspoken invitation. Isabelle hesitated for only a second before stepping forward. Slowly, cautiously, she crawled onto the bed, her movements hesitant, like she was afraid he'd change his mind. Nathan lay back, his muscles tense as she curled up beside him, her small hands gripping the edge of his shirt. She was warm, softer than he expected. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she exhaled, her body relaxing into his. Nathan hesitated before resting his chin lightly on top of her head. "You're safe," he murmured. Isabelle closed her eyes, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. For the first time in a long while, she believed it. She lay against him, fingers brushing lightly against the fabric of his shirt. His warmth surrounded her, his scent, a mix of faded cologne and something uniquely him, filled her senses. For weeks, she had been running. Tonight, she finally felt still. Nathan let out a deep breath, his arms loosely wrapping around her. "You're shaking," he muttered. Isabelle nodded against him. "I've never been this close to a man before." Nathan tensed slightly, but then he forced himself to relax. "I told you," he said softly. "I won't take advantage of you." Silence stretched between them. Then she lifted her head, her eyes locking onto his. "What if I want you to?" she whispered. Nathan's dark eyes flickered with something unreadable. He studied her, his thumb unconsciously brushing against her arm. "You don't mean that," he said quietly. Isabelle swallowed. "I do." Nathan let out a low, humorless chuckle, though his grip on her tightened slightly. "Isabelle," he muttered, his voice rough, strained. "You're scared. You're vulnerable. You don't want me. You just want an escape." She shook her head, her fingers clutching his shirt tighter. "Number, I want to feel something different. Something real." Nathan inhaled sharply as she placed a hesitant hand on his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "Isabelle," he warned, his voice thick with emotion. She moved closer, her breath warm against his skin. Their faces were inches apart now. She could see it in his eyes. The battle, the struggle between what was right and what he desired. "I trust you," she whispered. Nathan's jaw tightened, his breath uneven. He didn't know whether to push her away or pull her closer. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure which choice was the right one. Isabelle stirred as the first light of dawn crept through the luxurious guest room window. The air was thick with silence, except for the distant hum of Lagos waking up beyond the mansion's high gates. She sat up, the oversized t-shirt Nathan had given her slipping off one shoulder. Last night had felt like a dream. Nathan's unexpected kindness, the warmth of his arms when she had been too afraid to sleep alone. But this wasn't a fairy tale, and she didn't have the luxury of waiting for a night to save her. Chief Ibuka would come looking. And if she was still untouched, still pure, they would drag her back. She couldn't risk it. Quietly, Isabelle slid out of bed and tiptoed toward the door, her heart hammering. She had no idea where she would go. A bar? A cheap hotel? Find someone willing to help her lose what men like Ibuka valued most? The thought made her sick, but what other choice did she have? She swallowed the lump in her throat and turned the doorknob. The door barely creaked open before a firm, muscular arm shot past her, slamming it shut. She gasped, spinning around. Nathan. His tall frame loomed over her, shirtless, his dark eyes burning with something dangerous. His hair was still tousled from sleep, his jaw set in a firm line. "Where do you think you're going?" His voice was low, rough, laced with something she couldn't quite place. Isabelle's breath hitched. I need to go." Nathan's grip tightened on the door, blocking her exit. To do what? Throw yourself at some random guy? His voice was sharper now, his anger barely restrained. Her eyes flashed. "What choice do I have, Nathan? I need to be free. If I'm not a virgin, Chief Ibuka won't want me. That's my only way out." Nathan's jaw tensed, his fingers flexing at his sides. "And that's your plan? To let some stranger—" He exhaled sharply, rubbing his face. "Jesus, Isabelle!" She crossed her arms, her chin lifting defiantly. "You refuse to help me, so I'll do it myself." Nathan's eyes darkened, his expression unreadable. The muscles in his arms twitched, as if he were holding himself back. Then, in one swift movement, he stepped closer, his body caging her against the door. "You don't get to do this to yourself," he murmured, his voice low and dangerous. "Not like this." Isabelle's breath caught as his warmth surrounded her, his scent, a mix of faded cologne and something uniquely him, wrapping around her like a trap. Her voice wavered. "Why do you care, Nathan? Why does it matter to you what I do with my body?" His hands came up, framing her face with a gentleness that contrasted his intense stare. "Because you're not some pawn in a power game," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're not a damn bargaining chip, and I won't let you do this to yourself just to escape." She swallowed hard, her body betraying her as a tremor ran through her. "Then what am I supposed to do?" she whispered. Nathan exhaled heavily, his thumb brushing against her cheek. "You wait." She blinked. "What?" His gaze flickered to her lips, then back to her eyes. "You don't give yourself away like that. Not to me, not to anyone. Not until you're ready." His voice softened, his control slipping just a little. "You deserve more than desperation, Isabelle." The words sent a shiver down her spine. The air between them felt charged, electric. Nathan tilted his head slightly, his face so close that his breath brushed against her skin. His fingers slid down to her neck, barely touching, his warmth spreading through her. Isabelle's lips parted as she lifted her gaze to his. "And what if I want you to?" she whispered. Nathan's throat bobbed, his fingers tensed against her skin. The room felt too small, the space between them non-existent. His gaze darkened, his control hanging by a thread. "Don't tempt me, Isabelle," he muttered. She reached up, resting her trembling hand on his chest. His heartbeat was wild beneath her palm, matching her own. I trust you, she murmured. Nathan's breathing turned uneven. His fingers brushed the curve of her jaw, trailing down her neck, leaving a path of heat in their wake. For a moment she thought he would finally kiss her, but instead he let out a low, shaky breath and whispered, "We wait. Until you're ready." The words crashed over her like a wave, unexpected, but so deeply grounding. Nathan was different. He wasn't like the men who only saw her as a prize, a possession. He was giving her control. Bang! The loud noise shattered the moment, making both of them jump. Nathan's body went rigid, his eyes snapping toward the window. Another crash. Glass breaking. "Stay here." His voice was sharp now, commanding. But Isabelle was already shaking her head. "Nathan, what's happening?" He didn't answer. He grabbed a gun from the drawer near his bedside and turned toward the hallway. Isabelle's blood ran cold. "You have a gun?" Nathan shot her a look. Lagos isn't exactly the safest place. A third bang echoed through the house, and this time it was followed by voices outside. Nathan's expression darkened. They had found her. Isabelle's breath hitched as fear clutched her chest. "It's them." Nathan's grip tightened on the gun, his jaw clenching. "Stay behind me." A shadow moved past the window. As Nathan approached the door, a dangerous thought entered his mind. What if Chief Ibuka had already found her? His grip tightened on the doorknob, his pulse hammering in his ears. But when he finally swung it open, relief washed over him. It wasn't danger that greeted him. It was Cheek. Cheek stood there with a lopsided grin, a grocery bag in one hand and a steaming takeout container in the other. "You're alive," he drawled, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Figured you'd be dead in a ditch somewhere." Nathan smirked, shutting the door behind him. "Good to see you too." Cheek made himself comfortable, tossing the grocery bag onto the kitchen counter. "I brought food. Not that you deserve it. I saw your fridge last time. Looked like a war zone in there." Nathan chuckled, shaking his head. "You worry too much." "I cook for a living, Nathan. Your eating habits offend me." Cheek unwrapped the takeout container and waved the scent toward his nose. "That's why I brought you real food. If you don't eat it, I swear I'll throw it in your face." Nathan rolled his eyes but grabbed a fork anyway. "You're ridiculous." "And you're impossible," Cheek shot back. "Now where's your mystery house guest?" His sharp eyes scanned the room. Nathan stiffened. "She's upstairs." Cheek arched a brow. "So it's serious." Nathan didn't answer, just kept eating. Cheek watched him for a beat before shaking his head with a knowing grin. "Man, you're in trouble." Before Nathan could respond, soft footsteps echoed from the stairs. Isabelle appeared, wrapped in one of Nathan's oversized tees, the hem barely reaching mid-thigh. Her eyes flickered between the two men, then landed on Cheek with uncertainty. Cheek blinked. Then a slow smirk spread across his face. "Well, well, I finally meet the woman who has Nathan acting like a lovesick fool." Isabelle hesitated, gripping the fabric of Nathan's shirt as if it could shield her. She always felt uneasy around new people, especially men who carried the same air of confidence as Nathan. Cheek's teasing grin faded as he caught the fear in her eyes. "Relax," he said gently. "I don't bite." She nodded but remained wary, shifting closer to Nathan. Instinctively, he rested a reassuring hand on her back. Cheek sighed. "Great. Now I feel like the villain." Nathan chuckled. "She's just still adjusting." Cheek exhaled dramatically. "Fine, I'll win her over with food." Nathan scoffed. "That's your answer to everything." "Because it works." Cheek grabbed another container from the bag. "Isabelle, you eat, right?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Good." He handed her the container. "Here, consider this a peace offering." She glanced at Nathan, who gave a small nod, then took the food. Chike leaned back, satisfied. "See? We're making progress." Nathan watched Isabelle, the way she curled up on the couch with his shirt practically swallowing her, the way she carefully picked at her food, sneaking glances at him as if for reassurance. Cheek noticed too. "She's got you wrapped around her little finger," he muttered, amused. Nathan didn't even deny it. He just reached for his phone, scrolling through his favorite girly fashion page on Facebook. Cheeky raised a brow. "What now?" "I need to get her some clothes," Nathan said. "She can't live in my shirts forever." Cheek snorted. "Could have asked me. I know a few good places." Nathan side-eyed him. "I don't trust your taste." Cheek placed a hand on his chest, feigning offense. Rude. Nathan ignored him, clicking on a few options. Cheek watched him with growing amusement. "You do realize you just admitted you're whipped, right?" Nathan smirked. "Shut up!" But as he added the items to his cart, he knew Cheeky was right. Nathan pushed open the door, juggling shopping bags in both hands. The trip had taken longer than expected, thanks to Cheek's relentless teasing and unsolicited fashion advice. But in the end, Nathan had chosen everything himself: soft, comfortable clothes that would fit Isabelle perfectly. He stepped into the living room, expecting to see her curled up on the couch, probably buried in his blue shirt again. Instead, she was sitting on the floor with her back to him, legs folded beneath her. Something about the way she sat there, still, quiet, lost in her own world, made something in Nathan's chest tighten. He wasn't used to feeling things this deeply, and whatever this was, it unsettled him. But he forced it down, locked it away like he always did. Clearing his throat, he walked toward her, placing the bags down beside the couch. "I got you some things," he said casually. "You've been stuck in my blue shirt for too long." Isabelle turned, and for the first time that day she smiled, small, soft, but real. "I like your blue shirt," she teased, tugging at the fabric. Nathan huffed a chuckle, shaking his head. "I know. That's why I got you a few more options." She peeked into the bags, pulling out a soft, cream-colored hoodie and a pair of comfortable shorts. Her fingers ran over the fabric, her expression unreadable. "You picked these?" "Yeah," he admitted, watching her reaction. She bit her lip, then looked up at him. "You're full of surprises, Nathan." He shrugged, sitting on the couch and stretching his legs out. "You hungry?" She hesitated. Then, with a shy smile, she said, "Actually, I made something." Nathan arched a brow. "You cooked?" She nodded, standing up quickly. "Wait here." Nathan watched as she disappeared into the kitchen. A few minutes later, she returned, carefully carrying a plate. The moment she placed it in front of him, he stared at it, his expression unreadable. It was something. Pasta, maybe, or an attempt at it. The sauce looked slightly too thick, the noodles uneven. Some parts seemed overcooked, others underdone. And there was a suspicious amount of cheese melted on top, forming a gooey mess. He glanced up at Isabelle, who was fidgeting with the hem of her shirt, watching him like a nervous student awaiting a grade. He smirked, picking up a fork. "Did Cheeky see this?" She groaned, covering her face. "Number and he won't." Nathan chuckled, twirling a forkful of pasta. He took a bite. It wasn't terrible. It wasn't great either, but there was something endearing about the fact that she had tried. He swallowed and looked at her. "Not bad." Her eyes lit up. "Really?" Nathan tilted his head, debating. Then he smirked. "For a first attempt, let's call it edible." She gasped, smacking his arm. "Nathan!" He laughed, dodging another weak slap. "What? You want me to lie?" "I tried my best," she pouted, folding her arms. Nathan wiped his mouth with a napkin, then leaned in slightly, his voice softer now. "And I appreciate it." She blinked, caught off guard by his tone. Nathan leaned back, stretching lazily. "Next time I'll teach you a few things." Isabelle narrowed her eyes. Oh, so now you're a chef? No, but I know how not to burn water. She scoffed, shaking her head. You're impossible. Nathan just grinned, watching her. For the first time in a long time, his house didn't feel so empty. The house was quiet, the air thick with the weight of unspoken thoughts. Nathan sat on the edge of his bed, his elbows resting on his knees, his gaze fixed on the framed photograph in his hands. His father, a man of strength, but also a man destroyed by the wrong woman. The flickering light from the bedside lamp cast deep shadows across his face, emphasizing the tension in his jaw. He wasn't sleeping. He rarely did these days. A soft creak pulled him from his thoughts. He didn't turn around immediately. He already knew who it was. Isabelle. She was always quiet when she moved, hesitant, unsure. He could feel her standing in the doorway, her presence delicate yet undeniable. Nathan? Her voice was soft, almost afraid to break the silence. He exhaled deeply, setting the picture frame down on the nightstand. Couldn't sleep? She hesitated before stepping inside, the fabric of his oversized shirt brushing against her bare legs. No, she admitted, rubbing her arm. He finally turned to look at her. She wasn't standing close. She never did, as if afraid of taking up too much space. But there was something about the way she looked at him, the way she always seemed to be searching for something in his eyes. He patted the space beside him. Come here. She hesitated, but after a beat, she moved closer, sitting on the edge of the bed, knees drawn up slightly. Nathan leaned back against the headboard, rubbing a hand down his face. What were you looking at? She asked, nodding toward the picture. Nathan exhaled. My father. She tilted her head, curious. What was he like? Nathan's jaw clenched for a moment before he answered. He was a good man. Too good. He married the wrong woman, and it ruined him. Isabelle frowned. Your mother? Nathan let out a humorless chuckle. Yeah. She loved his wealth, not him. Used him, drained him. By the time he realized what she really was, it was too late. He ran a hand through his hair, his voice quieter now. She destroyed everything, and we suffered for it. Isabelle was silent for a long moment before she whispered, And now, you think you've done the same? Nathan's lips pressed into a thin line. She wasn't wrong. He had married a woman just like his mother, a woman who saw him as nothing more than a means to an end. His voice was rough when he spoke. Yeah. Isabelle shifted beside him, curling her fingers around the hem of his shirt. My father. She started hesitantly, as if the words were heavy on her tongue. He never really saw me. To him, I was just another piece to move around, a deal to be made. I was supposed to marry Chief Ibuka, a man old enough to be my father. Nathan's grip on the sheets tightened. He knew this already, but hearing her say it, hearing the quiet pain in her voice, it did something to him. I didn't have a choice, she continued. I was a child to them, a thing, not a person. They never asked what I wanted. It was always about what I could give, who I could benefit. She swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. I just wanted to be seen. Nathan turned his head slowly, his gaze locking onto hers. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. She looked at him then, not just at him, but into him, as if she could see the parts of himself he tried so hard to keep hidden. His voice was quiet but firm. I see you. Her breath caught. Something in his mind told him to bring her closer, to pull her against him, to kiss her. His fingers twitched. He could do it. She was right here. But he didn't. Because as much as he wanted her, as much as he felt this strange, unfamiliar ache whenever she was near, he wouldn't take advantage of her vulnerability. So instead, he reached out carefully, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She leaned into his touch. Neither of them spoke, Neither of them had to. For tonight, sitting in the quiet, knowing they were not alone in their pain, was enough. The moment between them. Isabelle exhaled softly, her lashes fluttering as she turned fully toward him. She was still hesitant, but there was something else in her eyes now, something deeper, something raw. "Nathan." Her voice was barely a whisper, but it held a weight he couldn't ignore. She wanted more. She wasn't just looking for comfort anymore. She wasn't just seeking safety. She was asking for something Nathan wasn't sure he had the right to give her. Her small hand reached for his, fingers trembling slightly as she laced them together. He felt the warmth of her skin, delicate and soft against his rough palm. "You know you can," she murmured, her gaze flickering between his lips and his eyes. Nathan's pulse thundered. He could. He could lean in. He could claim her the way his body demanded. He could silence all the doubts in his head with a single kiss. But would that be fair to her? She was fragile. She had spent her life being controlled, being told what to do, where to go, who to love. Would he be any different if he gave in now? His jaw tightened. "Isabelle," he said, his voice low and strained. He reached up, cupping her face carefully, his thumb brushing against her cheek. "You don't know what you're asking for." Her lips parted, her breath uneven. "I do," she insisted, her fingers gripping his. "For the first time in my life, I know exactly what I want." Nathan groaned softly, closing his eyes for a moment. He wanted her, too. That was undeniable. But the way she looked at him, like he was something more than a man weighed down by his past, by his failures, it made him feel like he didn't deserve her. "I'm not a good man, Isabelle," he murmured, his forehead resting against hers. She shook her head. "You're not perfect, Nathan. But you're mine." His breath hitched. Her. His? The thought shouldn't have sent a rush of possessiveness through his veins, but it did. She pulled back slightly, searching his face, desperate for something. For him. "Tell me this isn't real," she whispered, her voice breaking. He couldn't. Because it was. Instead of answering, he reached for her, gripping the back of her neck gently, his thumb skimming the sensitive skin just below her ear. Her breath hitched. A battle waged inside him. He could take her now, let this tension unravel in the way they both wanted, the way they both needed. But she deserved more than a moment of weakness. She deserved promises. So instead, he whispered, "I'm not going anywhere." Her eyes filled with something he couldn't quite name. Relief? Hope? Love? She swallowed, her fingers tightening in his shirt. "Promise me." His throat tightened. "I promise." She exhaled shakily, her lips dangerously close to his. "And what if I want more?" Nathan brushed his nose against hers, teasing, but not quite crossing that line. "Then I'll give it to you, when you're ready." Her body trembled against his. "I am ready." He smirked, his grip tightening on her waist. "Not yet," he murmured, brushing his lips against her forehead instead of where she really wanted them. She made a small, frustrated sound, and he chuckled. One day, but not tonight. Because tonight wasn't about taking. It was about a promise. But in that moment, neither of them needed words. They understood what they were building together, a bond that neither time nor circumstance could break. And for the first time in their lives, they both felt seen, truly seen by someone who valued them just as they were. Isabelle's fingers curled against Nathan's chest, her breathing uneven as she rested her forehead against his. His hand remained firm on her waist, grounding her, steadying himself. The tension between them was thick, unspoken, yet undeniable. She was the first to break the silence. "Do you think we'll ever be free?" she whispered. Nathan exhaled, his thumb tracing slow circles on her hip. I don't know, he admitted. But if we aren't, we'll face it together. She pulled back just enough to look at him, her eyes searching his face. There was something soft, something vulnerable in the way she stared at him, as if he was the only safe place she had ever known. He shouldn't be, but he was. Nathan lifted a hand, tucking a stray curl behind her ear. You should rest, he murmured, though even he didn't believe the words. Isabelle bit her lip. I don't want to be alone. His jaw clenched. You're not. She hesitated, and then with all the courage she could muster, she whispered, Then stay with me. Nathan stilled. His mind was telling him to step back, to draw a line before they crossed something irreversible. But his heart was telling him to pull her in, to give her what she needed, what they needed. Slowly, carefully, he shifted back against the pillows, pulling her with him. She followed without hesitation, curling into his side, her fingers gripping his shirt as if afraid he might change his mind. He wouldn't. Not tonight. Nathan exhaled deeply, his chin resting lightly on the top of her head. He could feel the way her breathing slowed, her body melting into his warmth. And in that quiet, intimate moment, he realized something terrifying. This wasn't just about protection anymore. This wasn't just about keeping her safe from Chief Ibuka. This was about her, about them. Nathan closed his eyes, his grip on her tightening slightly. No matter what happened next, he wasn't letting go. The golden rays of morning filtered through the sheer curtains, casting a soft glow over the room. Isabelle sat on the windowsill, hugging her knees to her chest, staring out into the quiet estate. Her heart still pounded from the events of the previous night, from the weight of Nathan's words, from the promise he had made. She wanted to believe she was safe, but how could she be when Chief Ibuka was out there, hunting her like a prized possession? The creak of the door made her turn. Nathan stood in the doorway, his presence commanding yet calm. He had changed into a fitted black tee and joggers, his hair slightly tousled from sleep. But his sharp eyes took her in immediately, the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers gripped the fabric of his shirt. You didn't sleep. It wasn't a question. Isabelle sighed, rubbing her arms. How could I? Nathan walked toward her, stopping just short of touching her. You're safe here. For now, she murmured. His jaw tightened. He hated the uncertainty in her voice. He had given her his word, but trust was something she had never been allowed to give freely. He leaned against the wall beside her. He won't find you. She let out a humorless laugh. You don't know Chief Ibuka. He doesn't lose. He will turn this entire city upside down for me. Nathan's eyes darkened. Then let him try. She turned to him fully now, frustration flickering in her gaze. You don't understand, Nathan. He's put a bounty on me. Nathan stiffened. He's offering money, not just any money, but a life-changing amount for anyone who sees me. Her voice trembled slightly. There are flyers with my picture, bills with the reward. The whole city will be looking for me soon. Nathan inhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. That bastard. Of course, Chief Ibuka wouldn't just let her go. He wouldn't take the humiliation lightly. So what? Nathan said, his voice dangerously calm. Let them look. They won't find you here. She searched his face, as if trying to find something solid in all this chaos. Why are you doing this for me? Nathan met her gaze, unwavering. Because I know what it's like to be trapped. Isabelle's breath caught. The room fell silent. And then there was that moment, the one where she had leaned in, where her lips had been just a breath away from his. He had wanted to. Every instinct had screamed at him to close the distance, to take, to claim. But he hadn't. Because despite everything, she was still vulnerable. And Nathan was many things, but he wasn't the kind of man who took advantage of weakness. A soft shuffle caught his attention. He turned just as Isabelle stepped into the kitchen, wearing another one of his oversized tees, his green one. He huffed out a quiet chuckle. You're making a habit of stealing my shirts." She stopped mid-step, blinking at him. Then, slowly, a small, sleepy smile tugged at her lips. "They're comfortable." Nathan shook his head but didn't argue. Instead, he reached beside her and slid a cup toward her. "Drink." She hesitated before taking it, fingers wrapping around the warmth. They stood there in silence, sipping their coffee. Nathan could feel her watching him, but he didn't push for words. He wasn't the kind of man who needed forced conversations. If she wanted to talk, she would. And if she didn't, that was fine too. For now, keeping her safe was the only thing that mattered. Across the city, Chief Ibuka paced his study, the veins in his temple pulsing with barely controlled rage. His estate was silent, but inside, a storm brewed. Isabelle was gone. Gone. And worse, she had humiliated him. The whispers had already started in his circles, how the great Chief Ibuka had been left standing at the altar by a mere girl. Unacceptable. He slammed a fist against his desk, rattling the crystal decanter beside him. His men had failed him. The search was dragging, and still, no sign of her. A stack of flyers lay on the table before him, her face printed in bold, the reward beside it promising a fortune to anyone who had information. It should have worked by now. Everyone had a price. His jaw clenched as his second-in-command, Enkay, stepped forward cautiously. "Chief, we've checked all major exits, airports, and even sent men to nearby towns. No one has seen her." Ibuka exhaled sharply through his nose, his patience hanging by a thread. "Then you're not looking hard enough." Enkay shifted. "We have informants in place. Someone will talk soon." Ibuka's lip curled. Soon is not good enough. He turned sharply, grabbing a stack of bills and slamming them onto the table. The crisp scent of cash filled the room. "Double it." Enkay's eyes widened slightly. "Triple it, if you have to," Ibuka growled. "I don't care what it takes, someone knows where she is." His voice dropped to something more dangerous. "And when they do, she will regret ever trying to run from me." The morning air was thick with tension as Nathan sat by the window, staring at the growing number of flyers that had started circulating across the internet. Each one bore Adaora's face, plastered everywhere, on social media, in street corners, and even in online classified ads. The bounty Chief Ibuka had placed on her head was high, more than enough to turn anyone's loyalty. It made Nathan's heart race with anger, knowing she was being hunted like a prize. As he scrolled through his phone, the constant stream of messages and posts made his stomach churn. Adaora's face seemed to be everywhere he looked, her eyes wide with fear, her soft smile replaced by the desperation of being on the run. Suddenly, his phone buzzed, and it was Cheek. Nathan hesitated before answering, knowing what was coming. "Nathan, man, what the hell are you thinking?" Cheek's voice crackled with urgency. "I've been seeing those flyers all over the place. What are you planning to do?" Nathan took a deep breath, trying to steady the emotions that surged within him. "I'm going to keep her safe, Chike, no matter what it takes." There was a long silence on the other end, followed by a frustrated sigh from Cheek. "Nathan, listen to me. I know you care about her, but you can't do anything stupid. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into. Chief Ibuka won't stop. He'll burn everything down to find her." Nathan clenched his jaw, a sharp edge to his voice. "You think I don't know that? You think I haven't thought this through?" "You're not invincible, Nathan," Chike shot back, the worry in his voice palpable. "I've known you long enough to know when you're about to do something reckless. You're not just protecting her, you're putting both of you at risk. I'm begging you, don't do anything dumb." Nathan's mind raced as he leaned against the kitchen counter, the weight of his friend's words settling in. He knew Cheeky cared, but this was more than just about Adaora's safety. This was personal. "I'm not doing this alone," Nathan said, his tone firm. "She's scared. I can't just sit back and let her be torn apart by this guy." Nathan felt a pang of doubt. He wanted to be the hero, to protect her. But maybe he was already too far gone to turn back. Maybe Cheeky was right. Chaik's voice broke the silence, softer this time. Promise me you won't do anything reckless. Please. For your own sake. Nathan paused, looking at the empty space in front of him. He could feel the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, heavy and real. I'll be careful, Chaiki, he said finally, his voice steady but carrying the weight of all his unresolved emotions. There was a pause, then a sigh of relief from Chaik. Good, just don't lose yourself in this, okay? Yeah, Nathan muttered, and the line went quiet for a moment. Thanks, Chaik. As he ended the call, Nathan let out a shaky breath. His mind was a blur of emotions. He wanted to be strong for Adaora, to be her protector in every sense of the word. But in that moment, it felt like the world was crashing down around him. He turned and looked at Adaora, who had been sitting quietly by the window, watching him with those unsure eyes. She looked small, fragile, a far cry from the confident woman he had first met. Nathan's heart clenched at the sight of her. Slowly he walked over to her, feeling a strange sense of urgency. When he reached her, he didn't say anything. Instead, he wrapped his arms around her, gently at first, but then tighter, as if trying to shield her from everything that was wrong in the world. Adaora tensed at the sudden embrace, her breath catching for a moment. But then she melted into him, her small figure fitting perfectly against his chest. The vulnerability in her was almost too much for Nathan to bear. His arms tightened around her, and for the first time, he felt like a hero. Not because he had some grand plan to save the world, but because in this moment, he was protecting the one person who needed him. Her arms wrapped around him hesitantly, her fingers brushing against his back, seeking comfort. Nathan rested his cheek on the top of her head, his mind racing with everything they had to face. But right now, in this small, quiet space between them, nothing else mattered. He wasn't letting go. Not now. Not ever. And for the first time, Nathan truly understood what it meant to fight for something worth fighting for. That night, the atmosphere inside Nathan's mansion was filled with the sounds of laughter and the clinking of game controllers. Nathan, Cheek, and Adaora were caught up in a lighthearted game, trying to forget the heavy cloud hanging over them. But as the sounds of joy continued, an unexpected noise pierced through, an engine slowly rolling to a stop outside. Cheek, ever the one to pick up on the slightest oddity, immediately stiffened. His hand darted to his phone, and without a word he began making rapid, hushed calls, his face darkening with concern. Nathan, noticing the shift in his friend's demeanor, looked over at Cheek. "What's going on?" Cheek looked up, his eyes narrowed. He said nothing. Before Nathan could respond, Cheek hung up and reached for his coat. "Stay here," he muttered, heading toward the door. Nathan shot him a questioning glance, but Cheeky was already out the door, disappearing into the night. Adaora, sensing the tension, stood silently by the window, peering outside, her pulse quickening as she stared at the silhouette of a black SUV parked just beyond the gates. Without a word, Nathan moved swiftly toward the security room, Adaora close behind. The surveillance footage flickered to life on the screen, showing two men stepping out of the vehicle. The leader, tall and imposing, walked toward the gates with purpose. Nathan's heart tightened in his chest as he recognized the figure. "It's him," Nathan muttered under his breath, his mind racing. It was the unmistakable figure of Chief Ibuka, though Cheek had no idea yet. Cheek's voice cut through the tense silence. "Who is that? Do you know them?" Nathan's jaw clenched. "I know exactly who it is. That's Chief Ibuka. He's come for Adaora." Cheek's eyes widened in realization. "The guy she's been running from?" Nathan nodded, his mind spinning. "Stay here, Chaik." Without another word, Nathan stepped out into the cool evening air, feeling the weight of what was coming. The gates creaked open, and Chief Ibuka stepped forward, a smug expression painting his face. His men flanked him like shadows, their presence ominous. "You have something of mine," Ibuka said smoothly, his voice steady but dripping with malice. "I've come to take her." Nathan's stance remained calm, his arms crossing over his chest. "Adaora is not an object to be taken." Ibuka let out a low, mocking laugh. "She is my fiancée. She belongs to me." Nathan didn't waver. "She ran from you. That should tell you everything you need to know." Ibuka's patience was fraying, his voice dropping to a low, threatening growl. "Listen, boy, I don't know what game you're playing, but you'd better step aside before you make an enemy of me." Nathan's lips curled into a tight smirk. "Funny, I was about to say the same thing." Ibuka's eyes flashed with confusion, then quickly darkened. He hadn't expected this level of defiance. "Do you know who I am?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Nathan took a deliberate step forward, his voice cutting through the tension. "I know exactly who you are, Chief Ibuka. A man who hides behind wealth and intimidation to get what he wants. But I'm not like the people you've controlled." He paused, locking eyes with Ibuka. "So let me make this clear. Adaora is staying here. And if you so much as breathe near her again, I'll have you in handcuffs before you can blink." Ibuka's fists clenched, his anger barely contained. "You think you can threaten me?" he spat. Nathan smiled coldly, unfazed. "It's not a threat. It's a promise." Ibuka's eyes hardened as his rage simmered, but deep down, he knew he had lost this round. The power he had wielded in other circles had no effect here. With a final venomous glare, he turned and walked back to his car, his men trailing behind him. The SUV rumbled to life and sped off into the night, leaving behind a heavy silence. Inside, Adaora rushed to Nathan, trembling. "He won't stop. He'll come back." Nathan wrapped her tightly in his arms, his voice calm yet resolute. "Let him try. But we both know this is far from over." The drive felt longer than usual. Nathan could feel Adaora's unease as they approached her childhood home. The place that once held so many memories of warmth and safety now felt distant and unfamiliar. The weight of what was to come hung in the air between them, a tension that neither of them could ignore. As they neared the house, Adaora's heart pounded in her chest. She'd been away for so long, and now she was returning not as the daughter who had left to start a new chapter, but as a woman who had run away from her own wedding day. The thought gnawed at her. What if they hate me? What if they blame me for everything? Nathan's steady presence beside her did little to calm her nerves. He had already done so much, helping her escape from Chief Ibuka and keeping her safe, but now she feared the judgment of the people she loved most. Her father, the one who had orchestrated the life she had tried so hard to escape, might never understand why she left. When the car stopped, Adaora hesitated for a moment, her fingers gripping the door handle. Nathan noticed her reluctance and turned toward her, offering a gentle smile. "You don't have to do this alone," he said quietly, his voice calm and reassuring. Adaora nodded, though the fear still clung to her. She stepped out of the car slowly, her legs unsteady as they led her up the familiar path to her parents' doorstep. The house seemed unchanged, yet everything felt different to her now. Her heart raced as Nathan followed close behind. The door opened and her mother stood there, a mixture of shock and relief in her eyes. The sight of Adaora, standing there, alive and well, was enough to bring tears to her eyes. "Adaora!" her mother whispered, rushing forward and enveloping her in a tight embrace. "Where have you been?" "We've been so worried." Adaora stood frozen for a moment before hugging her mother back, but the guilt inside her only grew. She had run away without saying a word, and now her family was caught in the chaos of her decisions. She didn't know how to explain it all, how to make them understand. Before she could speak, her father entered the room, his face a mixture of concern and confusion. His eyes quickly scanned the room, and when they landed on Adaora, something changed. He froze in the doorway, his face hardening, as though seeing her brought back memories of everything he had tried to control. "Adaora," her father said, his voice cold, yet laced with concern. "You've returned. But why? You've caused chaos by leaving on your wedding day." Adaora flinched, the weight of his words hitting her like a physical blow. She lowered her gaze, the shame of her actions still fresh in her mind. "I'm sorry, Papa. I didn't want to hurt you or Mama. But I couldn't marry him. I couldn't live the life you—" Her father's expression shifted, and for the first time, Adaora saw the regret in his eyes. He took a deep breath, as though struggling with the weight of his own actions. "I see now," he murmured, his voice quiet. "I was wrong. I let ambition cloud my judgment, and I forced you into a situation you never wanted." Tears welled in Adaora's eyes as she stood before him. "I'm sorry, Papa. I didn't mean to cause this much pain." Her father stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. "No, it is I who should apologize. I should have listened to you. I see now that your happiness was far more important than any position or wealth. I was wrong to think otherwise." Adora blinked in surprise. For the first time, her father was acknowledging the mistake he had made. It was a humbling moment, one that made her feel a bit lighter, but she still felt the weight of the truth hanging over them. Nathan, who had stood silently by the door, watched the exchange with quiet understanding. He had known how much Adaora had suffered, both from Chief Ibuka's pursuit and the pressure of her father's expectations. Adaora took a deep breath, her heart racing as she turned to face her parents. The weight of everything she had been through was heavy on her shoulders, but this moment felt like a turning point. Her mother and father were waiting, looking at her with both concern and relief, but Adaora knew it was time to speak the truth. With a glance at Nathan beside her, she took his hand in hers and squeezed it gently, grounding herself in his presence. Then she turned back to her parents, her voice steady, but filled with gratitude. "Mama, Papa," she began, her eyes meeting theirs with sincerity. "I know you've been worried, and I'm so sorry for everything I've put you through. But I need you to know something." She paused, her breath catching as she tried to find the right words. "This man here, Nathan, he's the one who saved me. He's the one who helped me escape, who protected me when I had nowhere else to turn." Adaora looked at Nathan then, her heart full of emotion. "Without him, I don't know where I'd be. He risked everything to help me, to get me away from Chief Ibuka and bring me back to you." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but her voice remained steady. "I owe him my life." Nathan squeezed her hand gently, his gaze never leaving hers. In that moment, Adaora knew, without a doubt, that she wasn't alone anymore. He stepped forward then, his voice calm but firm. "I want to thank you both," Nathan said, turning to Adaora's parents, "for raising such an incredible woman. It was my privilege to help Adaora escape the danger she was in. She's been through so much, and it's an honor to see her here, safe, and with her family." Adaora's mother nodded, gratitude shining in her eyes. But there was something more that Nathan wanted to say. As he turned to Adaora, his voice softened, and he took her hand in his. "And Adaora," Nathan continued, his gaze never leaving hers, "I want you to be my wife." Adaora's heart skipped a beat. She looked at him, her eyes wide with surprise, but she saw nothing but sincerity in his expression. The weight of everything that had happened seemed to dissolve in that moment. Nathan took a step closer, his voice steady. "I know it's not the right time, and I understand the fears you have, but I want you to know that I'll be here for you, always. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, Adaora, if you'll have me." Adaora's breath caught in her throat. her heart swelling with emotions she couldn't quite put into words. All the pain, all the fear, seemed to fade away in the warmth of Nathan's promise. In that moment, surrounded by the people who loved her most, she realized that despite everything, she wasn't alone. And for the first time in a long time, she felt hope. She squeezed his hand, her eyes glistening with tears. "I'll have you, Nathan. I'll have you." Her father, witnessing the exchange, smiled softly, a hint of pride in his eyes. "You have my blessing, Nathan, and you have my daughter's heart." As the family stood together in the warmth of that moment, Adaora finally felt like she was home, no longer running from the past, but embracing the future with the man who had rescued her and a family who had finally understood. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, she wasn't facing it alone. The day of Adaora and Nathan's wedding arrived with the warm embrace of the sun spilling over the horizon. The air was alive with anticipation, and the once heavy atmosphere that had surrounded Adaora now seemed lighter, filled with the soft echoes of laughter and joy. The mansion was adorned in gold and white, the colors reflecting their new beginning, and guests filled the venue, eagerly awaiting the union of two souls who had fought so hard for their love. Adaora stood in front of the mirror, dressed in a breathtaking white gown. It was elegant, yet simple, with delicate lace and beading that shimmered under the light. Her hair was styled in soft waves, and her face was glowing, not just with the makeup applied expertly by her sister, but with the inner peace she had finally found. It had taken so long, but here she was, ready to begin the next chapter of her life, a chapter that was hers to write. Nathan stood just outside the door, waiting with nervous excitement. He had seen Adaora in many different lights over the past few months, frightened, vulnerable, strong, and brave. But today, he saw her as his equal, his partner, the woman who had captured his heart in ways he couldn't have imagined. As the doors to the ceremony hall opened, he couldn't help but breathe in the sight of her. Adaora, standing in front of him, was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Their eyes met, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. She walked towards him, each step echoing the promise they had made to each other. Their hands joined, and the ceremony unfolded around them. But all they could focus on was each other. Their vows were simple, yet profound, a reflection of all they had endured and the love that had blossomed between them. "I promise to stand by you, Adaora," Nathan said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "To protect you, to love you, and to build a future with you, no matter the challenges." Adaora smiled, her eyes glistening. "I promise to trust you, Nathan, to walk beside you through everything that comes our way. Together, we will face it all." When the officiant finally declared them husband and wife, the crowd erupted in applause. But to Nathan and Adaora, the world outside of their vows seemed distant. All that mattered was the bond they had created, a bond that no one, not even Chief Ibuka, could break. As the soft evening breeze whispered through the open window, Nathan and Adaora sat together on the edge of the bed, the moonlight bathing them in its gentle glow. The world outside felt distant, as if it no longer existed. Only the two of them in this quiet space, their hearts beating in unison. Nathan reached for Adaora's hand, his thumb gently tracing the lines of her palm, as if memorizing every detail of her being. She looked at him, her eyes filled with trust, a depth of emotion she had never allowed herself to feel before. With a slow, deliberate movement, Nathan leaned in, brushing his lips softly against hers. The kiss was tender, full of all the words they had never spoken, all the promises they had made to each other. Adaora's breath caught in her chest, and she deepened the kiss, her hands finding their way to his shoulders. Nathan pulled her closer, his touch soft but insistent, as if he couldn't bear to be apart from her for another second. His lips moved to her neck, his breath warm against her skin, sending a shiver down her spine. For the first time, Adaora felt completely safe, cherished, loved, and free to be herself. There were no expectations, no worries, only the connection between them, deep and unwavering. With every touch, every kiss, the world outside seemed to disappear. They were no longer running from anything, no longer weighed down by the past. In this moment, it was just them, two souls intertwined in a dance that had been years in the making. As Nathan's hands gently caressed her skin, Adaora closed her eyes, savoring the sensation of being truly seen, of being loved without condition. There was no fear now, only the warmth of his embrace and the quiet comfort of knowing she was exactly where she belonged. Their hearts beat faster, their connection growing more intense with each passing second. And in that moment, as they gave themselves fully to each other, Adaora knew that she was home. Not just in Nathan's arms, but in the life they would build together, full of love, trust, and the promise of a future that was theirs to create. When the night grew quiet again, they lay together, their bodies wrapped in the warmth of each other's presence. Adaora rested her head on Nathan's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, knowing that this was only the beginning of a journey they would share forever. In that stillness, with nothing but the sound of their breathing and the soft rhythm of the waves outside, they found peace. And in each other, they found all the love they had ever dreamed of. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more heartfelt moments and incredible journeys, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. We'd love to have you join the family and continue exploring these emotional, unforgettable tales together. Leave a comment and let us know what you think, and feel free to share with friends who would love this as well. Meanwhile, Cheek was at the salon, making female hair, and was simply teasing when he mentioned Adaora hiding in his friend's house. It was due to the excessive chatter in the salon, and he didn't mean for it to go any further. However, one lady overheard the conversation and passed the information to Chief Ibuka. When Chike found out, he apologized for the unintended leak. See you in the next video.